When you mix oil and water, no matter how much you shake them, they'll always separate. That's exactly what happens when American culture tries to mix with Chinese culture. On the surface, they might look compatible, both ambitious, both powerful, both driven by a desire for success. But deep down, their foundations couldn't be more opposite. One believes in freedom, the other in order. One worships the individual, the other the collective. One lives for expression, the other for discipline. At first glance, America and China look like reflections of each other's greatness, giants on opposite sides of the Pacific. But if you look closer, you'll see the cracks forming beneath the illusion of cooperation. When these two civilizations try to blend, they don't create harmony. They create tension, confusion, and identity loss. American culture says, be yourself. Chinese culture says, be part of something greater. American culture celebrates rebellion. Chinese culture rewards obedience. One believes that truth is spoken loudly. The other believes that truth is understood quietly. The result? When these two worlds collide, whether in business, education, family, or even love, the clash is inevitable. The American way values questions. The Chinese way values answers. The American mind asks, why? The Chinese mind asks, how? The American spirit says, I have rights. The Chinese one says, I have duties. And yet, both sides keep trying to blend. Corporations, couples, governments, and students all chase this illusion that somehow, by mixing two opposites, they'll create something stronger. But nature doesn't work like that. What they actually create is confusion. Because when you take a culture built on expression and place it inside a system built on silence, someone has to lose their voice. And usually it's the one that speaks first. Every culture has a heartbeat. For America, it's freedom. For China, it's order. These two rhythms can never beat in sync. In America, freedom is not just a value, it's a religion. It's in the movies, in the music, in every classroom that tells children to follow their dreams. Americans are taught that life's purpose is to be unique, to question everything, to stand out. In China, the purpose of life is the opposite, to bring honor to the group, to the family, to the nation. Individual desires come second to collective duty. In the West, this might sound oppressive, but to the Chinese mind, it's harmony. When Americans see rules, they want to break them. When Chinese see rules, they want to master them. When Americans fail, they reinvent. When Chinese fail, they endure. When Americans speak, they say, I think. When Chinese speak, they say, we believe. It's not arrogance, it's programming. Centuries of philosophy, from Confucius to Mao, taught the Chinese that order sustains peace. Chaos destroys it. So while Americans celebrate revolution, the Chinese remember that revolution once burned their world to ashes. This is why business deals collapse. The American CEO wants quick innovation. The Chinese counterpart wants stability. The American employee values personal credit. The Chinese worker values the team's reputation. Freedom creates speed, but order creates power. And when freedom meets order, both suffer. America sees control where China sees coordination. China sees recklessness where America sees ambition. This is not a difference of style, it's a difference of soul. One side breathes oxygen, the other discipline. When they share the same room, they both start choking. The deepest divide between American and Chinese culture isn't political, it's personal. It's the definition of love, loyalty, and identity. In America, parents raise children to leave home. In China, parents raise children to never leave completely. In the West, independence is the goal. In the East, interdependence is survival. An American child says, I want to make my own choices. A Chinese child says, I can't shame my family. An American parent asks, are you happy? A Chinese parent asks, are you honorable? The family system is the core of Chinese society, multi-generational, hierarchical, and sacred. It's not about affection, it's about structure. In China, your family name defines your social weight. Every success you achieve belongs to the group. Every mistake you make stains it. Meanwhile, in America, identity is self-made. People change cities, careers, and even names to chase dreams. Success belongs to the individual. Failure too. The American family celebrates independence. The Chinese family fears it. When these two worlds collide, say an American marrying a Chinese partner, the conflict becomes emotional warfare. The American sees love as a choice between two people. The Chinese sees love as a contract between two families. To an American, privacy is sacred. To a Chinese, secrecy is protection. To an American, honesty means transparency. To a Chinese, honesty means harmony. One tells the truth to clear the air. The other hides it to keep the peace. And that's why so many relationships between Americans and Chinese crumble. They don't collapse from lack of love, but from too much misunderstanding. Because what one calls honesty, the other calls disrespect. When cultures define love differently, even affection can turn into a battlefield. There's a saying in China, losing face is worse than losing money. And for Americans, that's hard to understand because Western culture doesn't operate on face. It operates on facts. In America, confrontation is seen as healthy. Say what you mean, they're told. In China, confrontation is poison. Say what maintains peace. For Americans, truth is a weapon. For Chinese, it's a responsibility. One is public. The other is private. When an American tells the truth bluntly, they see themselves as honest. A Chinese person sees it as rude, even cruel. When a Chinese person avoids confrontation, they see it as graceful. An American sees it as dishonest. This obsession with face, the invisible social reputation that defines respect, governs everything in Chinese society. It controls how people speak, how they criticize, and even how they show love. Saving face means keeping dignity, protecting harmony, and avoiding embarrassment at all costs. In America, losing face doesn't exist. You fail, you start over. You fall, you post about it online, and people applaud your resilience. In China, you fail silently. You rebuild in the shadows, and you emerge only when you've restored your honor. This is why Western directness doesn't translate. An American boss telling an employee, "You made a mistake," is humiliating in Chinese context. Criticism must come gently, indirectly, wrapped in respect. The American sees efficiency. The Chinese sees cruelty, and yet both sides believe they're right. Because in America, truth is justice. In China, face is peace. When these two values collide, truth and face both are wounded. The American feels lied to. The Chinese feels shamed. And the bridge between them starts to crack, not from hate, but from pride. There's another battlefield between American and Chinese culture, how they create. In America, innovation is the highest form of intelligence. To invent, to disrupt, to break the system, that's the dream. Americans worship the idea of the rebel genius, the visionary who changes the world from a garage or a dorm room. But in China, imitation isn't shameful. It's survival. The Chinese approach to creation is built on mastery, not rebellion. You study the greats, you copy them, and only after perfection do you innovate. In America, copying is seen as stealing. In China, it's seen as learning. That's why when an American company complains that a Chinese firm stole its idea, the Chinese engineers don't even feel guilt. To them, it's collaboration, improvement, evolution. The American sees theft. The Chinese sees respect. The American mind thrives on risk. The Chinese mind thrives on repetition. The American wants to be first. The Chinese wants to be flawless. The American creates chaos to find opportunity. The Chinese creates order to preserve it, and yet the results speak for themselves. America dominates in creativity. China dominates in execution. One builds ideas. The other builds empires. But when these two forces try to mix, they destroy the very balance that made them powerful. In business, Americans push for quick profits, innovation, and disruption. The Chinese prefer long-term plans, control, and consistency. The American CEO says, "Let's move fast and break things." The Chinese manager replies, "Move steady or lose everything." Neither is wrong, but together, they can't move at all, Because when one side demands freedom and the other demands perfection, all that's left is frustration. One of the deepest cultural divides between America and China is speech. How a society handles the truth says everything about its soul. In America, people are taught to speak their minds. Protest, express, criticize. These are seen as rights, not risks. From college campuses to late-night shows, debate is part of the DNA. The American ideal says if you silence one voice, you silence freedom itself. But in China, speech has a different meaning. Words are not tools for freedom. They are instruments of stability. The Chinese have lived through dynasties where one word could start a rebellion or end a life. From the emperors to the Communist Party, control of speech was never oppression. It was protection. To Western ears, that sounds like tyranny. But to many Chinese, it sounds like peace. The American says, I have the right to say what I want. The Chinese says, I have the duty to say what keeps harmony. When these two worlds meet, especially online, the clash is violent. Americans flood forums with unfiltered opinions. Chinese users watch silently, cautious of what can and cannot be said. The American sees censorship. The Chinese sees discipline. Freedom of speech builds creativity. Control of thought builds unity. But freedom without control breeds chaos. And control without freedom breeds silence. This is the paradox. Both sides think they're saving the world, but each believes the other is destroying it. So when Western media accuses China of silencing truth, and Chinese media accuses America of spreading lies, both are right and both are wrong. Because truth itself bends depending on which culture is holding the microphone. And in a world where these two giants now share the same digital space, the question is no longer who's right, but whose truth survives longer. Culture doesn't just shape how people think, it shapes how they love, and nowhere is the American-Chinese clash more explosive than in relationships. In American culture, love is freedom. It's personal, emotional, and built on choice. You follow your heart, even if the world disapproves. Marriage is a contract of love, not obligation. Divorce, while painful, is accepted as part of life. In Chinese culture, love is duty. It's not just about two people. It's about two families, two histories, two legacies merging. Marriage isn't only about romance. It's about responsibility. Divorce isn't failure. It's shame. An American says, I want to be happy. A Chinese says, I want to make my family proud. An American loves to express. A Chinese loves to preserve. An American chooses with emotion. A Chinese chooses with calculation. This difference creates heartbreak when East meets West. American partners often mistake Chinese restraint for coldness. Chinese partners see American openness as recklessness. To Americans, love means speaking your mind. To the Chinese, love means enduring in silence. To Americans, loyalty means staying true to feelings. To the Chinese, loyalty means fulfilling duty, even when feelings fade. And yet, both kinds of love are powerful in their own way. The American way burns fast and bright. The Chinese way lasts quietly for decades, but when mixed, they consume each other. The American feels unloved. The Chinese feels misunderstood. When love is freedom on one side and sacrifice on the other, the bridge between hearts becomes a battlefield. The final and most dangerous clash between American and Chinese culture is not about the past. It's about the future. Both nations believe their way is the right way for humanity. America sees itself as the beacon of liberty, the land where the individual defines destiny. China sees itself as the guardian of civilization, the land where collective harmony ensures survival. The American dream says, everyone can be a leader. The Chinese ideal says, 1,000 leaders without unity is chaos. In technology, America builds platforms of freedom, social networks, open markets, startups. China builds systems of control, super apps, surveillance, state coordination. One bets on creativity, the other bets on order. And both work until they collide. When American companies enter China, they suffocate under regulation. When Chinese companies expand west, they collapse under criticism. Both sides call the other unethical, unfair, arrogant. Both are mirrors of their own blind spots. Even the definition of success is different. In America, success means independence. In China, success means recognition. In the West, you celebrate standing out. In the East, you celebrate belonging. But the real danger comes when these two forces compete not for trade or power, but for the soul of the next generation. Because as technology fuses the world, the line between American freedom and Chinese discipline begins to blur. Young people grow up scrolling between both realities, one that tells them to rebel and another that tells them to obey. The question is no longer, can these two cultures mix? The question is, what happens if they already have? And neither side wants to admit it, because mixing American and Chinese culture is not about food or business or politics. It's about the deepest philosophies of human existence: freedom versus order, self versus system, chaos versus control. And when those opposites meet, they don't blend, they collide. So maybe, after all, American culture and Chinese culture were never meant to mix, not because one is better than the other, but because each one was built to survive the other's absence. Because when freedom tries to live inside control, both eventually die.